Admiral Zixtel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Dominance, watching the stars shift back to normal view as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace. His 4 eyes focused on the yellow star ahead of them. This was Sol, home to the primitive species called humans. Today would be the day they learned their place in the galaxy. The Admiral's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. Around him, the bridge crew of his flagship worked at their stations. Through the massive viewports, he could see his fleet spreading out in perfect formation. 12 massive dreadnoughts led the way, each one capable of destroying a moon. Behind them came 47 cruisers, bristling with weapons that could level cities. 200 smaller ships filled out the fleet, carrying troops and supplies for the harvest that would come after the humans were gone. This was the 47th Conquest Fleet of the Kethvari hegemony. They had destroyed civilizations across 7 star systems. No species had ever stood against them and survived. The humans would be no different. "Report," Zextel commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 200 victories. "All ships have arrived safely, Admiral," his tactical officer replied. "We are at the edge of the target system. Initial scans show 1 inhabited planet, 3rd from the star. Population approximately 8 billion of the target species." Zextel nodded. 8 billion was more than most worlds they conquered, but it made no difference. The Kethvari had weapons that could kill billions in minutes. Any defensive capabilities detected? "Some primitive satellites in orbit around their world, Admiral. Chemical rockets for local transport. No energy shields detected. No plasma. Weapons. They appear to be using basic nuclear fission for power." The officer paused. This should be over quickly. The Admiral allowed himself a moment of disappointment. He had hoped these humans might provide at least some entertainment. The last 3 worlds had surrendered without a fight once they saw the fleet. Before that, they had faced a species that managed to destroy 2 of his smaller ships before. Being wiped out. At least that had been interesting. "Time to target?" he asked. 17 hours at current speed, Admiral. 17 hours to cross this system and reach the human world. 17 hours until another planet fell to the might of the hegemony. Zextel had done this so many times that it felt routine. Arrive, demand surrender, demonstrate superior firepower, then begin the harvest. The pattern never changed. The Kethvari Empire had been expanding for over 2,000 years. They controlled 43 worlds now, each one stripped of its resources and useful population. The remaining natives were left to serve the hegemony or die. It was a system that had worked perfectly for millennia. Earth was just another dot on their star charts. Intelligence reports said the humans had only reached space travel 70 years ago. They used crude chemical rockets and had barely explored their own system. Their weapons were still based on metal projectiles and primitive explosives. They had never even detected the Kethvari scout ships that had been watching them for decades. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we are receiving transmission from the target world." This was unexpected. Most primitive species couldn't detect them until they were much closer. "Put it through." A voice filled the bridge, speaking in the human language that their computers could translate. "Unknown vessels, this is Earth Defense Command. You have entered sovereign human space without permission. State your intentions or leave immediately." The bridge crew looked at each other with amusement. Sovereign space? These humans thought they owned this entire system? The audacity was almost funny. "They can see us?" Zextel asked his sensor operator. "Impossible, Admiral. We are 17 light hours away. Their technology should not be able to detect us at this range." The Admiral frowned. Perhaps the humans had better sensors than intelligence had suggested. It made no difference. Better sensors would not save them from the firepower approaching their world. "Open a channel," Zexthal commanded. It was time to deliver the standard ultimatum. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, Admiral. Zexthal straightened. To his full height, his purple skin darkening with authority. Primitive species of the third planet. I am Admiral Zexthal of the HFY hegemony. Your world has been selected for harvest. You will evacuate this system within 1 solar rotation or face complete extinction. This is your only warning. The response came faster than expected. A different voice this time, older, with an accent. Their computers struggled to translate. This is Admiral Jake Morrison, United Earth Defense Force. You picked the wrong planet, Bug Boy. You've got exactly 1 chance to turn that fleet around and get out of our system. This is your only warning. The bridge fell silent. In 200 conquests, no primitive species had ever responded to the ultimatum with threats. Most begged for mercy. Some tried to negotiate. A few simply went silent in terror. None had ever told a HFY admiral to leave. Is that primitive? Just threaten us? His tactical officer asked in disbelief. It appears so, Zexthal replied, his mandibles spreading in what his species considered a smile. Perhaps this would be more interesting than he had thought. Admiral, the sensor operator called out, confusion clear in his voice. I am detecting energy signatures from multiple locations in this system. Very strong energy signatures. Explain. There appear to be installations on several of the outer planets and their moons. The asteroid belt is showing massive metallic concentrations that were not in our original survey data. The operator paused, checking his readings again. Admiral, there are ships out there. Many ships. Zexthal moved to the sensor station and looked at the display. What he saw made no sense. The humans were supposed to have basic space travel. A few small stations, maybe some mining operations on their moon. Instead, the display showed installations throughout their system, bases on their outer planets, massive structures in their asteroid belt, and ships. Hundreds of ships moving, in organized formations. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence reports said they were primitives. Admiral, the communications officer interrupted. We are being scanned. Multiple sources, very sophisticated scanners. They are mapping our entire fleet. Something cold settled in Zexthal's stomach. Sophisticated scanning technology was not something primitives possessed. The humans were examining his fleet with equipment that shouldn't exist on their world. Admiral Morrison, came the human voice again. We know who you are. We know what you've done to 43 other worlds. We know about your empire and your harvest fleets. What you don't know is that we've been expecting you for 30 years. 30 years? That was impossible. The HFY had only discovered this system 15 years ago. How could the humans have known they were coming? You see, Admiral, the human continued, we found one of your scout ships back in 1947, took it apart piece by piece, learned about your technology, your empire, your methods. We've been preparing for this day ever since. Zexthal felt his confidence wavering for the first time in decades. Scout ships were nearly undetectable. How had these primitives found one? How had they learned to use HFY technology? You made one big mistake, the human admiral went on. You assumed we were like all the other species you've conquered. Peaceful farmers and merchants who never saw you coming. Well, Admiral, humans aren't farmers. We're predators. We've been fighting wars since before we could walk upright. And now, thanks to your people, we know how to fight wars in space. The sensor operator looked up from his station, his face pale. Admiral, long-range scans are showing massive fleet movements throughout this system. These are not primitive ships. Energy signatures match or exceed our own technology levels. Zexthal stared at the tactical display as red dots appeared throughout the human system. Each dot represented a ship, Not the crude chemical rockets their intelligence had promised, but real warships. Dozens of them, then hundreds, then more than his. Computers could count. Impossible, he whispered. Admiral Morrison, his communications officer, said quietly. The human is speaking again. We gave you a chance to leave, Admiral. You chose to stay. That's fine by us. Earth has been itching for a real fight for 30 years. You brought us the biggest fleet in your empire's history. The human's voice carried something that Zexthel had never heard in a primitive species before. Confidence. Deadly, absolute confidence. Thank you. This is going to be fun. The Admiral stared out at the stars, realizing that everything he thought he knew about this species was wrong. The humans weren't prey at all. They were something far more dangerous. They were hunters who had been waiting for him to walk into their trap. Admiral Zixthol paced the bridge of his flagship, his claws clicking against the metal floor. The display screens around him showed a picture he did not like. Red dots filled the tactical map, each one representing a human ship. There were 2. Many red dots. How many ships do they have? He demanded. His tactical officer checked the readings again. At least 300 confirmed vessels, Admiral. Possibly more. Our sensors are detecting new contacts every few minutes. 300 ships. The humans were supposed to have maybe a dozen crewed vessels for moving between their planets. Instead, they had built a fleet that could challenge his own. How was this possible? Admiral, the communications officer called out. The humans are transmitting again. It appears to be their final answer to our ultimatum. Put it through. The same voice from before filled the bridge. Admiral Morrison sounded calm, almost bored. Admiral Zexthel, your time is up. Since you chose to ignore our warning, we're going to give you a demonstration of what happens when you threaten Earth. Pay attention. Zexthel waited. Demonstrations from primitive species usually involved firing a few crude missiles that his shields would easily absorb. It was always pathetic. Show me what your species can do, human. Watch your sensors, bug boy. The insult stung, but Zexthel focused on the tactical display. Something was happening in the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets. Energy readings were spiking across multiple contacts. Admiral, his sensor operator said, voice tight with confusion. Massive energy buildup detected. Multiple sources in the asteroid field. Whatever they're powering up, it's big. Weapons? Unknown design. Energy output is ... significant. The display showed new contacts lighting up throughout the asteroid belt. Dozens of them. They had been hidden somehow, masked from Kethvari sensors, until now. As Zexthol watched, the contacts began to move. Not ships. Something else. Platforms. Weapons platforms. Target analysis, he ordered. Admiral, these appear to be fixed fortifications built into the asteroids themselves. They're railguns. Massive railguns. Each platform appears capable of accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Railguns. Zexthel knew the theory, but no species had ever built them this large. The engineering challenges were too great. The power requirements were enormous. How big are these weapons? Each platform appears to be several kilometers long. Admiral, the projectiles. The projectiles are the size of small ships. Before Zexthel could respond, the human admiral spoke again. Fire. The tactical display lit up with lines of light streaking across the system. Dozens of projectiles launched. From the hidden platforms, moving faster than anything the Kethvari had seen before. The tungsten slugs, each one weighing several tons, crossed the empty space between the asteroid belt and the Kethvari fleet in minutes. Evasive action. Zexthol shouted, but it was too late. The first projectile struck the cruiser Void Razor. At 90% of light speed, The tungsten slug punched through the ship's shields like they were made of paper. The cruiser simply came apart, torn into pieces by forces no ship could withstand. More impacts followed. The cruiser Dark Storm disappeared in a flash of vaporized metal. The destroyer's swift death lived up to its name, dying swiftly as a railgun. Slug tore through its reactor core. In 30 seconds, the humans had destroyed 5 ships with weapons the Kethvari had thought impossible to build. Damage report. Zexthel commanded as his bridge crew scrambled to respond. 5 ships destroyed, Admiral. 3 more heavily damaged. The humans. Their weapons completely bypassed our shields. Bypassed their shields. The Kethvari had the best defensive technology in the galaxy. Their shields could stop plasma cannons, deflect particle beams, and absorb the energy of nuclear explosions. But kinetic weapons moving at these speeds were different. They carried too much energy. There was no defense except not being hit. Return fire, Zexthel ordered. Target those platforms. Admiral, we are at extreme range. Our weapons will take several minutes to reach the targets. Fire anyway. Show these humans what real weapons can do. The Kethvari fleet opened fire. Plasma cannons discharged brilliant beams of superheated energy. Particle beams lanced across space at the speed of light. Quantum torpedoes streaked toward the human positions, each one carrying enough power to level a city. Zexthel watched the weapons close on their targets, satisfaction returning to his thoughts. Let the humans see what happened when they challenged. The hegemony. Let them watch their precious platforms burn. The weapons struck the asteroid field and simply disappeared. What happened? Zexthel demanded. Where did our weapons go? His tactical officer stared at his displays in confusion. Admiral, the humans appear to have some kind of defensive system. Our weapons are being absorbed. Absorbed? That's impossible. The energy signatures suggest they're using our own power against us, Admiral. They're capturing our weapons fire and redirecting it somehow. Zexthel felt something he had not experienced in decades. Uncertainty. The humans had weapons that could destroy his ships and defenses that could stop his weapons. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. Admiral Morrison, he said into. The communication system. Impressive weapons. But you have only destroyed a few of our smaller ships. We still have 12 dreadnoughts. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy your entire world. The humans' response was immediate. Is that a threat, Admiral? It is a promise. Surrender now, and we will allow your species to serve the hegemony. Continue this resistance, and we will turn your planet into molten rock. Silence stretched across the communication channel. Then Admiral Morrison spoke again, and something in his voice made Zexthel's skin crawl. You know what, Admiral? I was going to give you one more chance to leave. But you just threatened to destroy Earth. That was a mistake. More energy signatures appeared on the tactical display. These weren't coming from the asteroid belt. They were coming from everywhere. The outer planets, their moons, even from the direction of Earth itself. Admiral, his sensor operator said quietly, I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout this system. Hundreds of sources. They're all targeting us. That's impossible. No species has that many weapons platforms. Admiral Morrison came. The human voice again. You wanted to see what we can really do? You got it. Boys, light them up. The tactical display exploded with incoming fire. Not just from the asteroid belt now, but from every direction. Railgun slugs, plasma bolts of human design, particle beams that cut through space like knives. And something else, something new. Admiral, his tactical officer shouted. Incoming missiles, hundreds of them. Impossible. Our sensors would have detected missile launches. Sir, These missiles appear to be using some kind of stealth technology. They were completely invisible until they entered attack range. The first wave of human missiles struck the Kethvari formation. But these were not the crude nuclear weapons intelligence had suggested. These were fusion warheads wrapped in containment fields that allowed them to burn for several seconds before detonating. The explosions created miniature suns that lasted long enough to melt through the strongest armor. The cruiser Crimson Fang took a direct hit and simply vanished in a ball of artificial fire. The destroyer Nightwing lost half its hull to a plasma bolt that seemed to bend around its shields. The dreadnought Eternal Wrath, pride of the 47th Fleet, shuddered as multiple railgun slugs punched through its armor like it was made of cloth. Shields down to 60%, his defensive officer reported. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Zexthol stared at the tactical display in growing horror. His fleet was being torn apart by an enemy that wasn't supposed to exist. The humans weren't fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They weren't trying to defend their world. They were hunting his ships like predators stalking prey. "Admiral," his communications officer said, voice shaking. "The humans are transmitting again. Put it through." Admiral Morrison's voice filled the bridge, and now Zexthol could hear something that chilled him to his core. The human was laughing. "How are you enjoying the demonstration, Admiral? Because that was just round one. We've got a lot more where that came from." Round one. This devastating attack that had crippled a quarter of his fleet was just the beginning. Zexthol realized with growing terror that the humans had been holding back. They had more weapons, more platforms, more ships. "You see, Admiral," Morrison continued, "we've had 30 years to prepare for this moment. 30 years to study your technology, improve our own, and plan exactly how we were going to kick your ass when you finally showed up. You brought us the biggest fleet in your empire's history, and we're grateful. It's going to make our victory that much more impressive." Zexthol looked around his bridge. His crew stared back at him with fear in their eyes. Outside the viewports, human weapons fire lit up space like deadly fireworks. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were burning and dying around him. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zexthol began to wonder if he might lose. Admiral Zexthol watched his fleet burn and tried to understand what had gone wrong. 23 ships destroyed in the first exchange. His mighty dreadnoughts, each one a masterpiece of Kethvari engineering, were taking damage from weapons that should not exist. "Status report," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. 15 ships destroyed, Admiral. 8 more heavily damaged. "The humans are regrouping for another attack," his tactical officer reported. "Their weapons are unlike anything in our databases." Through the viewport, Zexthol could see the wreckage of his cruisers drifting in space. Each piece of twisted metal represented decades of construction and thousands of crew members. The humans had done this in minutes. "How are they doing this?" he asked. "Our intelligence said they were primitives." Admiral, his science officer, spoke up from her station. "I've been analyzing their weapons. They appear to be using hybrid technology. Part Kethvari, part something else, something new." "Explain." "Their railguns use our power generation systems, but with projectiles made from materials we've never seen. Their shields work on principles similar to ours, but are somehow more efficient. And their ships—" She paused, checking her readings. "Again, their ships are moving in ways that should be impossible." On the tactical display, the human fleet was reforming. Their ships moved with a precision that impressed even Zexthol. No wasted motion, no confusion. Every vessel knew exactly where it needed to be. "They're learning from our attacks," the science officer continued. "Each time we fire, they adapt their defenses. Each time they attack, they improve their accuracy. I've never seen tactical evolution this rapid. tactical evolution. The humans were getting better at fighting, even as the battle continued. The Kethvari had faced many species, but none that could adapt this quickly under fire. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "the humans are transmitting again." Zexthal straightened. Perhaps they were ready to negotiate. Perhaps they had proven their point and would accept terms. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was not Admiral Morrison this time. It was younger, female, with an accent from a different part of their world. "Kethvari Fleet, this is Commander Elena Vasquez of the UES Retribution. We're coming for you." Before Zexthal could respond, the tactical display lit up with new contacts. A squadron of human fighters was approaching at incredible speed. Not large ships, but small, fast vessels that darted between the larger ships like insects. "Defensive fire," Zexthal ordered. "Destroy those fighters." The Kethvari point defense systems opened fire. Beams of coherent energy lanced out toward the approaching human ships. The fighters scattered, their pilots executing maneuvers that should have been impossible. They rolled, dove, and twisted through the defensive fire like they were dancing. "How? Are they avoiding our weapons?" his tactical officer demanded. "Their acceleration rates are off the charts," the sensor operator replied. "And their pilots?" "Admiral, these pilots are pulling maneuvers that would kill any normal being. The G-forces alone should crush them." The first human fighter broke through the defensive screen and dove toward the dreadnought's stellar dominance. Its weapons fired small plasma bolts that seemed insignificant compared to ship-to-ship weapons. But the bolts found their targets with impossible accuracy, striking the dreadnought's weapon systems and disabling entire batteries. One fighter disabled a dreadnought's main guns. Zexthal could not believe what he was seeing. "Not disabled, Admiral. Destroyed. Those fighters are carrying weapons that punch far above their weight class." More fighters broke through the defensive fire. They moved like a pack of predators, coordinating their attacks with deadly precision. One fighter would draw defensive fire while others attacked from different angles. When one was damaged, the others covered its retreat. "These pilots are insane," his tactical officer said, watching a human fighter ram directly through a cloud of defensive fire. "They're flying straight into our weapons." "Not insane," the science officer corrected. "Fearless. There's a difference. They know exactly what they're doing." Commander Vasquez's voice came through the speakers again. "Sorry about your guns, Admiral, but we're just getting started." The human fighter squadron reformed and dove toward another target. This time they approached the cruiser Night Saber from 6 different directions simultaneously. The cruiser's captain tried to turn to bring his main weapons to bear, but the fighters were too fast, too agile. "They're not trying to destroy our ships," Zexthal realized. "They're disabling our weapons systems." It was a surgical strike. The fighters hit the cruiser's weapon mounts with precision that spoke of months of practice. In seconds, the Night Saber went from a deadly warship to a floating target. "Admiral," his communications officer said urgently. "Priority transmission." From the Hegemony High Command, Zexthal nodded. "Put it through." The image of Supreme Admiral Kethvar appeared on the main screen. His scaled face showed the fury that came from receiving bad news. "Admiral Zexthal, explain to me why I'm receiving reports that the 47th Fleet is under attack by primitives." "Supreme Admiral, the humans are not primitives. They have advanced technology and a fleet that rivals our own." "Impossible. Our scouts reported basic chemical rockets and primitive satellites." "Our scouts were wrong, sir. The humans have been hiding their true capabilities. They've been preparing for our arrival for decades." Supreme Admiral Kethvar's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me that you are losing to a species that achieved spaceflight less than a century ago?" Zexthal looked at his tactical display. Another cruiser was taking heavy damage from human weapons. Two more fighters had broken through his defenses and were systematically destroying the point defense systems on his flagship. The situation is ... complicated. Uncomplicated, Admiral. You have the largest fleet in hegemony history. Use it. Yes, Supreme Admiral. The transmission ended, leaving Zexthal alone with his failure. He had to end this quickly before more bad news reached the High Command. All ships, new formation. Tighten defensive screens. Concentrate fire on the human fleet. We end this now. The Kethvari fleet began to move into a new formation, pulling their ships closer together to provide mutual support. It was a good plan. It should have worked. That was when the humans revealed their next surprise. Admiral, his sensor operator, called out in alarm. New contacts appearing throughout the system. Large contacts. The tactical display updated to show massive objects emerging from behind planets and moons. Ships that dwarfed even the Kethvari dreadnoughts. Vessels that looked like they had been built to fight wars between star systems. How big are those ships? Zexthal demanded. The largest is 12 kilometers long, Admiral. It's bigger than a space station. 12 kilometers. The humans had built warships the size of cities. How had they hidden construction projects this massive? Admiral Morrison, Zexthal said into the communication system. What are those ships? The human admirals. Response was cheerful. Those? Oh, those are our battleships. We built them in the asteroid belt over the last 20 years. Took a while to finish them, but we figured we'd need something big to deal with your dreadnoughts. Battleships. The humans had built battleships. In secret, using resources from their asteroid belt. While the Kethvari had been content with their existing technology, the humans had been innovating, improving, preparing. You see, Admiral, Morrison continued, we studied your tactics very carefully. We know how your empire fights. You rely on superior numbers and overwhelming firepower. So we built ships that could match your firepower and tactics, that could beat your numbers. The human battleships began to move into formation. Each one bristled with weapons that could challenge entire fleets. And behind them came more ships. Cruisers built with human engineering principles. Destroyers that moved like fighters, but hit like battleships. We also studied your psychology, Morrison added. We know that your species values honor and personal glory above tactical sense. We know that you'll fight to the last ship rather than retreat. That's going to work out very well for us. Zexthal felt something cold settle in his stomach. Humans hadn't just prepared weapons and ships. They had prepared for the Kethvari mindset. They knew how his people thought, how they would react, how they would fight. Admiral, his tactical officer said quietly, the humans are jamming our communications. We can't reach the other fleets or request reinforcements. Cut off, isolated, facing an enemy that had studied them for decades and prepared for this exact moment. Zexthal looked around his bridge and saw the same realization in his crew's eyes. They were not the hunters anymore. They were the prey. The human battleships closed in on the Kethvari fleet like giant predators moving toward wounded prey. Admiral Zexthal watched them approach and tried to count his remaining options. There were not many. Status of the fleet, he commanded. 37. Ships destroyed, Admiral. 15 more with heavy damage. We still have functional weapons on 68 vessels, his tactical officer reported. The humans have lost only 4 ships. 4 ships. In a battle that had destroyed more than half his fleet, the humans had lost 4 ships. The mathematics of this engagement were becoming impossible to ignore. Their largest battleship is closing. On our position, Admiral, the sensor operator announced. 12 kilometers long, weapon systems beyond our classification scale. Through the viewport, Zexthul could see the human battleship approaching. It moved slowly, but with obvious purpose. Weapons ports along its hull glowed with barely contained energy. This single ship carried more firepower than most planetary defense systems. "Open fire on that battleship," Zexthul ordered. "All dreadnoughts, concentrate fire. If we can destroy their largest ship, it might break their morale." "Yes, Admiral." The remaining Kethvari dreadnoughts turned their weapons toward the approaching human battleship. Plasma cannons charged to full power. Particle beam arrays locked onto their target. Quantum torpedoes loaded into launch tubes. Fire. The combined firepower of 8 dreadnoughts lanced across space toward the human battleship. Enough energy to vaporize a moon focused on a single target. The beams struck the battleship's shields and simply vanished, absorbed by defensive systems. That seemed to grow stronger under attack. Direct hit, Admiral. No apparent damage to the target. No damage. The humans had built a ship that could absorb the combined fire of 8 dreadnoughts without taking any damage at all. Zexthul felt his confidence crumble a little more. "Admiral Morrison," he said into the communication system. "Impressive defenses, but we still outnumber you. Surrender now, and the hegemony will offer generous terms." The human admiral's laughter filled the bridge. "Generous terms? That's funny. You came here to wipe out my entire species, and now you want to negotiate? The situation has changed. Your people have proven themselves worthy of joining the hegemony. The situation has changed. All right, but not the way you think." Morrison's voice carried a note that made Zexthul's skin crawl. "Tell me, Admiral, have you been paying attention to the rest of the galaxy while you've been busy getting your fleet shot to pieces?" "What do you mean?" "I mean we've been broadcasting this entire battle on every frequency in known space. Every species in the galaxy is watching the mighty Kethvari Empire get handed their asses by a bunch of primitives from Earth. Broadcasting. The humans had been transmitting the battle to the entire galaxy. Every species that the Kethvari had conquered or threatened was watching their fleet being destroyed. The implications hit Zexthul like a physical blow. "You see, Admiral, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every species your Empire has enslaved. And right now, they're all watching you lose." The communications officer looked up from his station with fear in his eyes. "Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Multiple species are declaring independence from the hegemony. Rebellions are starting on 17 worlds. 17 worlds. The foundation of the hegemony's power was based on fear and the belief that resistance was impossible. If the subjected species saw the Kethvari fleet being defeated, that fear would disappear. The Empire would collapse from within." "Admiral," the tactical officer called out urgently, "the human battleship is firing." A massive human ship opened fire with weapons that defied classification. Particle beams that seemed to bend space itself. Plasma cannons that fired contained stars. And something new, something that made the air on the bridge crackle with static electricity. "What is that weapon?" Zexthul demanded. "Unknown technology, Admiral. It appears to be some kind of gravity weapon. It's creating localized distortions in space-time." The gravity weapon fired, and the dreadnought Void Crusher simply folded in on itself. The massive ship compressed into a ball of twisted metal and then expanded violently, tearing itself apart. From the inside, the crew of 40,000 died in seconds. "How is that possible?" his science officer whispered. "No species has ever developed gravity weapons." "The humans have," Zexthul said quietly. They had not just matched Kethvari technology. They had surpassed it. They had built weapons that his empire could not even understand. "Admiral," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Morrison. Get through." "Admiral Zexthul, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about Earth anymore. This is about every species your empire has murdered. Every world you've harvested. Every civilization you've destroyed. Morrison's voice carried a cold fury that Zexthul had never heard before. You made one critical mistake. You assumed that every species would react to conquest the same way. That everyone would just roll over and accept slavery. More human ships were moving into position around the Kethvari fleet. Not just the battleships now, but smaller vessels that moved with deadly purpose. Cruisers that fired weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. Destroyers that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Humans don't work that way, Admiral. When you push us, we push back harder. When you threaten us, we eliminate the threat. When you try to enslave us, we free everyone else you've enslaved. Morrison paused. Captain Santos, you're cleared for your attack run. Who is Captain Santos? Zexthul demanded that his answer came in the form of a human cruiser diving directly toward his flagship. The ship moved at impossible speed, its pilot, executing maneuvers that should have torn the vessel apart. Defensive fire from his fleet couldn't touch it. That ship is heading directly for us, his tactical officer reported. Collision course. Destroy it. We're trying, Admiral. The pilot is. The pilot is not flying like any rational being would. Fly. The human cruiser approached the flagship like a missile with a guidance system. It rolled through defensive fire, dove under a plasma barrage, and accelerated toward the Crimson Dominance at ramming speed. Evasive maneuvers, Zexthul ordered. Sir, the ship is too close. We can't avoid collision. The human cruiser struck. The flagship's shields at full speed. But instead of destroying itself in the impact, it fired every weapon it had, point-blank range. The shields collapsed under the assault, and the cruiser's pilot ejected just as her ship broke apart against the flagship's hull. Hull breach on 17 decks, the damage control officer reported. We've lost main engines and half our weapon systems. Half their weapon systems destroyed by a single ship. A single pilot who had been willing to sacrifice her vessel and nearly her life to damage his flagship. What kind of species produced warriors like this? Admiral, the sensor operator called out. I'm detecting escape pods. The human pilot survived. Survived. She had crashed her ship into a dreadnought, ejected at the last second, and lived to tell about it. And from the communications chatter he could hear, she was already requesting pickup so she could get back into the fight. Admiral Morrison. Zexthul said into the communication system, your pilot just sacrificed her ship to damage mine. That level of dedication is ... impressive. Captain Santos volunteered for that mission, Admiral. Just like Lieutenant Commander Park volunteered. For his, what mission? His answer came in the form of another human ship diving toward a different target. This time, it was a destroyer approaching the dreadnought Eternal Wrath. But this pilot wasn't planning to ram the ship. He was planning something worse. Admiral, his science officer said with growing horror, that destroyer is carrying some kind of gravity weapon. If it gets close enough, the human destroyer fired its gravity weapon at point-blank range. The dreadnought Eternal Wrath began to twist and buckle as localized gravity fields tore it apart from the inside. The massive ship turned inside out, its hull folding like paper in a windstorm. Another volunteer, Admiral, Morrison said. We've got plenty more where they came from. Zexthul looked around his damaged bridge and realized the truth. The humans weren't just better armed or better prepared. They were fighting with a level of dedication and sacrifice that his species couldn't match. Every human pilot was willing to die to protect their world. Every ship was expendable if it could damage the enemy. How many volunteers do you have? He asked quietly. All of us, Admiral? Every single human in this system volunteered to fight you. 8 billion people who, would rather die than surrender to your empire. Morrison's voice carried absolute certainty. The question is, how many Kethvari are willing to die for a conquest that's already failed? Looking at his tactical display, Zexthul could see the answer. His fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And around the galaxy, 17 worlds were declaring their independence because they had seen the impossible happen. The Kethvari Empire was losing its first war in 2,000 years. Admiral Zexthul stood on his damaged bridge and watched his empire die. The tactical display showed only 19 ships remaining from his mighty fleet. 19 ships out of 259 that had entered this system. The humans had reduced the most powerful force in Kethvari history to scattered wreckage floating in space. Admiral, his communications officer said quietly, "We're receiving surrender offers from our remaining ships. The captains are requesting permission to withdraw, surrender." The word tasted bitter in Zexthul's mouth. No Kethvari fleet had ever surrendered. But then, no Kethvari fleet had ever faced an enemy like humanity. "Denied," he said. "We finish this mission, or we die trying." His tactical officer looked up from his station with something approaching mutiny in his eyes. "Admiral, we have lost. The humans have destroyed us. Continuing this battle serves no purpose." "The purpose is honor," Zexthul replied. "The Kethvari do not flee from primitives." "These are not primitives, Admiral. These are the most dangerous predators we have ever encountered." Through the viewports, Zexthul could see the human fleet forming up for what would clearly be the final assault. Their battleships moved into position like the closing jaws of a trap. Their smaller ships swarmed around the remaining Kethvari vessels like hunting animals surrounding wounded prey. "Admiral Morrison," he said into the communications system, "I offer terms. Withdraw your fleet, and the remaining Kethvari ships will leave this system." "Terms?" Morrison's voice carried genuine amusement. "Admiral, you came here to commit genocide. You threatened to turn Earth into molten rock. And now you want to negotiate terms? The situation has changed. Yes, it has. You're losing. Badly. But I'll tell you what, Admiral. I'll give you the same terms you offered us. Evacuate this system within 1 hour, and we won't kill every last one of you." 1 hour. Zexthul looked at his tactical display. His ships were scattered, damaged, and surrounded. Even if he ordered a retreat immediately, the humans could destroy his remaining vessels before they reached the edge of the system. "You know, we cannot comply with those terms," he said. "Then you'll die here," Morrison replied simply. "Just like you planned to make us die." Zexthul closed his eyes and made his decision. If the 47th Fleet was going to die, it would die fighting. All ships, final assault formation. Target the human homeworld. We will complete our mission. "Admiral," his tactical officer protested, "our weapons cannot penetrate the human defenses around their planet. Then we will die trying." The remaining Kethvari ships began to move toward Earth. It was a pathetic formation compared to the mighty fleet that had entered this system. Damaged ships limping toward a target they could not destroy, crewed by warriors who knew they were going to die. "Admiral?" The sensor operator called out. "The human fleet is moving to intercept. All vessels are targeting us. Let them come." The human ships opened fire with every weapon they possessed. The space around the Kethvari formation lit up with deadly energy. Plasma bolts, particle beams, railgun slugs, and the terrifying gravity. Weapons that could crush ships like insects. The cruiser Dark Wing took a direct hit from a gravity weapon and folded in on itself like paper. The destroyer Swift Vengeance disappeared in a ball of plasma fire. The dreadnought Stellar Dominance, veteran of dozens of conquests, broke apart under a barrage of railgun slugs, but the remaining ships pushed forward toward Earth. They had. 2. Honor demanded it. Distance to target? Zexthel asked. 2,000,000 kilometers, Admiral. The humans have defensive platforms around their world. Massive defensive platforms. Through the tactical display, Zexthel could see them. Weapons platforms the size of moons orbiting Earth like artificial satellites. Each one bristled with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. The humans had turned their homeworld into the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. How many platforms? He asked. 147 confirmed platforms, Admiral. Each one appears to be heavily armed. 147 weapons platforms. The humans had built a defensive network that could have held off 10. Fleets the size of the one Zexthel had brought. They had been ready for anything the Kethvari could send against them. Admiral, his communications officer said. Admiral Morrison is transmitting again. Put it through. Admiral Zexthel, this is your last chance. Surrender now, and we'll allow your surviving crew to return to Kethvari space with a message. What message? That the age of empires is over. That any species that threatens genocide will face the same fate you're about to face. That humanity is now the protector of every world your empire has enslaved. Protector? The humans didn't just want to defeat the Kethvari fleet. They wanted to replace the hegemony as the dominant power in this part of the galaxy. They wanted to free every world the Kethvari had conquered. You would rule over other species? Zexthel asked. Rule? No, Admiral. Protect. There's a difference. We don't want to conquer anyone. We want to make sure no one conquers anyone else. The remaining Kethvari ships continued their desperate advance toward Earth. 7 ships now, each one taking continuous fire from the human fleet. The dreadnought Crimson Dominance shuddered as another gravity weapon hit its hull. Hull breach. On all decks, the damage control officer reported, life support failing. We have maybe 10 minutes before total system failure. 10 minutes. Zexthel looked at the distance to Earth. They would never make it. The human defenses would destroy them long before they could fire a single shot at the planet. Admiral, his tactical officer said quietly, we could still surrender. No, we finished this. The tactical display showed the Earth defense platforms. Powering up. Weapons that could crack moons focused on the approaching Kethvari ships. This was the end. Zexthel knew it. His crew knew it. But they would die as Kethvari warriors. Admiral Morrison, he said into the communication system, we reject your terms. The Kethvari do not surrender. I know, Morrison replied, and his voice carried something that sounded almost like respect. That's why this galaxy will be better off without your empire. The Earth defense platforms fired. Every weapon on 147 platforms discharged simultaneously. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize continents. All of it focused on 7 damaged Kethvari ships, but something impossible happened. The weapons fire stopped just short of the Kethvari fleet, and a wall of energy hung in space between the platforms and their targets, absorbing the incredible destructive power. What happened? Zexthel demanded. Admiral, his sensor operator said in amazement. The humans stopped their own weapons. They're not firing at us anymore. Admiral Morrison's voice filled the bridge one last time. Admiral Zexthel, I'm offering you one final choice. Not surrender. Not negotiation. A choice. You can die here with honor, fighting to the last ship. Or you can live and carry a message back to your empire. What message? That humanity has claimed this part of the galaxy. That we're now the shield between your empire and every species you've enslaved. That if the Kethvari want to continue their expansion, they'll have to go through us. Zexthel looked around his dying bridge. His crew stared back at him with exhaustion and defeat in their eyes. They had fought bravely, but they had been beaten by a superior enemy. And if we choose to live, then you go home. You tell your Supreme, Admiral, what happened here. You tell him that 43 worlds are now under human protection. You tell him that the age of Kethvari expansion is over. Through the tactical display, Zexthel could see ships approaching from every direction. Not human ships. Ships from dozens of different species. The subjugated worlds of the hegemony were sending their own fleets to join the humans. Admiral, his communications officer said quietly, I'm receiving transmissions from species across the galaxy. They're all declaring independence. They're all asking for human protection. The Empire was collapsing. 2,000 years of conquest were ending because of this one battle. Because humanity had shown that the Kethvari could be beaten. Admiral Morrison, Zexthel said finally, we accept your terms. The survivors will return to Kethvari space. With your message. Good choice, Admiral. Captain Shun will escort your ships to the edge of the system. Don't come back. Zexthel looked out at the human fleet one last time. These strange, violent, impossible creatures had destroyed his empire. With nothing but determination and their refusal to surrender. They had turned the galaxy upside down in a single battle dot as his damaged ships limped toward the edge of the system. He heard Admiral Morrison speaking to the galaxy on an open channel. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. To every species listening, to every world that has suffered under Imperial rule, to every civilization that has been threatened by empires, you are now under the protection of humanity. The age of conquest is over. Welcome to the age of freedom. Zexthel closed his eyes and prepared for the long journey home. He would deliver the human message to the Supreme Admiral. He would tell them that the Kethvari Empire had met its match. He would explain that humanity was everything the galaxy had been waiting for. A species strong enough to protect the weak and crazy, enough to fight impossible odds. The mighty 47th Conquest Fleet was no more. In its place was a new order, protected by a species that treated war like a game and peace like